All right, we're going to move into the panel that addresses educational applications for XR. So I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Elin Björling, a senior research scientist in the Human-Centered Design and Engineering Department. She is the co-founder of the Momentary Experience Lab, conducting design and development projects that capture data and intervene to improve health in the real world.
I believe I'm going to invite my panel up here, so come on up. Thank you. We have a pretty short amount of time, so I'm going to let each of my panelists introduce themselves and just briefly, and then also I'd love to hear what particular XR project you're currently working on. Jared, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Jared Canright. I'm a PhD student in the physics department here at UW. My PhD project is in the Physics Education Research Group, where I'm looking at the role of VR in physics education. The project we're working on is Novel Observations in Mixed Reality, or NOMR. And rather than trying to teach content, we're trying to address the fact that students don't really ever get to create new knowledge in their science labs. Rather, they're verifying facts that they already know. They can find on Google, and worse, they're kind of viewed as naive or amateurish versions of those facts. And creating new knowledge is an essential part of the scientific process, and so we want our future scientists to have some practice doing that. And so what we do is we make up physics. We make up fictitious physical phenomena, and we have students explore them in VR to develop new mathematical models for those phenomena.
Awesome, thank you. Maureen.
Hi, I'm Maureen, and my pronouns are they, them. So I'm a UX designer at a design agency called Artefact, where we are focused on creating equitable and sustainable futures. So my role is focused on envisioning future products and services that might exist in the world 3, 5, 10 years out from now, and making sure that it's not only informing business strategy, but also making it in service of people in need, especially people who are marginalized today. And so the last XR project, or most of my XR projects really are about defining use cases that then inform people's products strategy and their hardware development. And so something I've recently worked on is, well, actually not recently, but my favorite project I worked on maybe 3-4 years ago was talking about business use cases, but then making sure it's also inclusive of people with different abilities.
Nice, welcome. Juan?
Hi, I'm Juan Rubio. I lead digital media programs at the Seattle Public Library. And the program that I'm working currently, that I've been working actually with Elin a lot, is creating spaces for mental health for teens. We are creating a program where we harness the potential of VR to engage teens and then build strong relationships through co-design, then to stigmatize mental health, support their mental health, and that way we create a library that reacts to the needs of the community.
Nice, welcome. All right, well, I am going to ask you guys, which you already know, a couple of questions because I think this is an opportunity to really talk about virtual reality and AR and so forth in the scope of education, which I think we probably all agree has huge potential. So I'm just curious to hear if you had to say what you think like the current real benefit of XR in education is right now. So what do you, in your own experiences, what are you seeing as the real benefit? And I'm staring at you, Jared, but anyone's welcome to jump in.
Kind of a non-answer, but I feel like it strongly depends on what you're trying to teach. Like, The only universal I've found is that there's really no one way to apply VR to education. There's rather very niche opportunities it has in teaching every subject that to kind of elicit, you have to bring in teachers and develop applications with them in the process to really figure out what that opportunity is. I'd say there's infinitely many of them. I mean, you can create any universe you want in VR. But to actually find those, you need to go to the people who are trying to teach those subjects.
Which I like to call getting the humans in the loop. So you just made a nice plug for human-centered design, whether you know it or not.
I mean, that's a great point because, like, I think one issue with adoption is that we need to think about not only students who use it, but also teachers and the larger stakeholder groups. So when we think about education, typically right now, XR is applied to technical training, people who are working really technical jobs, who are already in jobs or much older. But when we want education in XR to be ubiquitous, we have to think about younger students too, who live with family. And one story I always hear today, before even XR is ubiquitous, is like they've changed how we teach math. Like I can't help my kid, I can't teach them. So when we think about designing education for XR, we have to think about not just the students, right?
Right.
That speaks to you, right?
Nice. Anything you want to add?
Oh, and to answer your question, I
Yeah.
think one huge benefit that I consider universal is creating global classrooms and nurturing our students to be global citizens because, you know, personally, when I stepped into my job, I grew up in Hong Kong, right? So I was not familiar with American culture at all. And when I arrived in America, I was like, I have no idea how to blend and communicate with these people. I don't understand their culture. I don't understand their history and their background. Why are they behaving certain ways? But if students from a young age are engaged with the global community and learn from people with diverse backgrounds, it makes for a much like fluent, I don't know, transition into life. And you also learn a lot more. Your worldview is so much bigger.
Yep, it's a beautiful application. Juan, anything to add about the benefit?
Well, I'm interested in like spaces. I've always been interested in spaces, and I think that creating spaces that are different, that are very humane, kind of like occupy the metaverse, you know, and create things that are more compassionate, less about like profit. And I think that imagine futures as well, that VR gets you into this space where you can really imagine futures that don't exist. And I really like how teens connect to that whimsical magic that VR has, you know. So I really like that, and they respond a lot to telepresence, right? Especially during the pandemic, because they were just seeing the flat screen. So when we took them to VR chat, they were incredibly excited and happy. So there's all of this potential. You know, we can talk a lot about it.
Yeah. A little more engaging than Zoom. Okay, so I'm really curious about barriers or concerns that you've encountered. And Jared, you already mentioned sort of like not keeping the teachers in the loop with the content, or Maureen, you mentioned not keeping the parents in the loop as we think about education. So just from your perspectives, what kinds of barriers or concerns do you have at this point, knowing what you know about the capability of the technology?
The biggest challenge I've had to overcome is that when introducing new technology, be it VR or anything else into the classroom, it's absolutely essential that nobody gets left behind in that process. And at this point, as was discussed earlier, there are still people who get nauseous wearing a VR headset. There are people for whom the hardware is just not designed. And some people just could physically, but do not wish to. And if we were bringing VR into an educational setting, then those people can't be put out by it. And so the way we've gone about addressing that is we use a group model for all of our labs, where you can't really do the lab if you don't have someone outside of the headset taking notes and guiding the person in the headset. And that way, and really the meat of the lab is not actually doing the thing in the headset, but making sense of what's happening in the headset.
I totally agree, because like I think the hardware and capability right now, by definition, is exclusive. Like we assume people can see, we assume people can hear, they can touch, that they can use gesture control. And that is an issue in education because it feeds the loop of inequity where like if students don't have access to technology, then some wealthier students or more able-bodied students have exclusive types of education. And if we look at the education landscape right now, they're already like lower income students, like people who live in lower income families are already experiencing a wide like gap of inequity in terms of education, and it impacts like what jobs they get in the future, what income they get in the future, and it's just like a constant loop. So like we have to make sure that we instill practices that make sure we don't leave people behind for sure.
Equality and accessibility. Juan, anything to add to that?
What was the question about,
About
the
barriers or
barriers?
concerns.
I think that you have to think about the adults in the process that are going to be guiding the students through it. It can be really intimidating and hard for educators or people who are not familiar with this high learning curve of VR and how to approach it. So you have to think, I think, about the educators and how you're going to onboard them so that they feel comfortable about the technology and not intimidated. And that's something that I encounter
Yeah.
all the time.
And no one mentioned, so I'm going to throw it in there, but the development, like the skill you need to develop in VR is still outside of the access of most individuals, I would say.
And the obvious one is cost, right? And I have this idea that, we can leverage the education infrastructure with libraries and stuff. And because you're from Seattle Public Library, I'm super curious, like, if you think that is feasible, if there are channels in which, like, why can't students just rent headsets? I mean, like, they already do that at my university.
Or check them out at the library.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky. I think it has to do with like foundations or the federal government to eliminate the barrier of the access to the equipment. And we were lucky to be able to receive that support. And what happens then is that you then focus on something different, which is the content creation, the co-design, the creating together, right? So I would love to see tools that are the Squarespace of VR, something that is very easy to do. I tried to introduce Mozilla hubs, but people were having a lot of hard time, but I really liked it because it was kind of easy in a way for me at least, but not for others. So I think to your question, I think it's finding the support from the government foundations through grants that is going to let you have those spaces.
All right. We'll save that one for next. I'm curious to know where you think, given all of us in some regard are working in XR and development, where do you think this is going to be in 10 years? If you try to jump way ahead and say, education in XR in 10 years, maybe put a positive spin on it before imagining. But I'm just curious what you think is possible when you look ahead.
I would really love for instructors to be able to build entire worlds for their students. Like the trouble with bringing pre-built like simulations, educational technology into the classroom is often it really narrows like what curriculum you can build around it. It narrows the scope of the stories that the instructor is able to bring their students through. And like every instructor teaches in a different way, and some built-in lessons will align with a teacher's skill set better than others. And so I would really love in 10 years for instructors to have the tools to not just bring a VR or lab into the classroom, but design with a very user-friendly set of tools what exactly that VR lab is going to be. Or VR lesson, rather.
So more fully integrated into the classroom, ideally.
So they're not just users, but they're also creators, right? That's what you're
Exactly.
saying.
Like they can play the role of a DM in a tabletop RPG. Like they create the setting and the story that the lesson that the students are going to be working through with them.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
Juan, where do you see us in 10 years? Where's Seattle Public Library and VR in 10 years?
We are going to have social interaction, full social interaction happening in VR across communities.
Nice.
That would be really nice, right? So you no longer have to rely on one of the things that is so hard for teens to do is transportation from one place to the other. If I have you've seen that because we work together, so it's really hard for them to get a ride or a bus. So wouldn't it be great to just we have a room in South Park, and we are communicating or working together with teams in Texas or Washington D.C. So I'd love to see that.
Yeah, so in reducing those geographic boundaries. Okay. Maureen, 10 years from now.
I don't know if it's 10 years, but I think with like XR and our ability to personalize learning in the future, I really hope that the way we assess our students completely changes. Like our current exam systems, all of that gone. Like we can actually personalize how people, like I'm a visual learner and I learn by doing something. Some people learn by reading and hearing, right? So I hope that kind of extends into how we actually assess how well people are doing and learning, and not think about just technical hard knowledge and skills, but also think about like critical thinking, problem solving skills, and how can we actually see students demonstrate that in XR very successfully.
Here.
Yeah, I love that idea. All right. I'm going to ask you guys one more question, and then I think we'll have enough time. I'm going to open it up in case other folks want to chime in with their questions. Let's say, what are the missed opportunities? So let's think about right now in time. What are you wandering around? I do this all day, every day. And you're like, why in the world aren't we what? What is it that you're just surprised we're not doing given the technology that we potentially could be leveraging?
Maureen, you seemed really excited about this question.
Right, I gotta think about it. I need to think about it for a second. There are too many ideas.
Oh, well, so do I.
Go for it.
One?
No, I'm you can have it.
Guys. It's kind of surprising to me that we aren't using phone AR a little more. Like, I haven't really seen that adopted, and perhaps I just exist in the wrong circles, but I haven't really seen that adopted like at all. And I don't really see asymmetric interactions considered in context of VR applications for education. Like maybe one person in a VR headset, but then someone with phone AR who can like see projected onto a table what exactly is happening in that VR headset.
Asynchronous collaborations.
Yeah, asynchronous and asymmetric collaborations.
Asymmetric, yeah, that's a better word.
Like you only really, like say a group of 4 students, if you only need the one VR headset and the rest of them can collaborate without a headset or just with their phones, then your hardware cost is dropped by a factor of 4. And I feel like that really helps get over one of the bigger barriers we face right now. I just don't really see much of that at the moment.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. Another idea, what are we thinking should be happening and somehow it's not happening? I mean, I'll just chime in, Jared, when you said that. I'm not supposed to be on the panel, but I can't help myself. That when you said that, I think about at UW and health sciences, we have this gorgeous media wall for surgery. I don't know if that came up this morning, but right where you're asymmetrically collaborating because you feel immersed even though you're at this media wall. And I keep thinking about education and how we're like, oh, we don't have enough headsets for everybody, but we don't need enough headsets for everybody if we have these asymmetric sort of setups where people are engaged but on different tiers of immersion and so forth. So that feels like all you would need maybe is a huge TV screen to even begin that kind of a system, right? So, all right, anything else?
I have 2, but I lost the first one.
Oh no, we waited too long.
Now I'm losing the second one too, damn. I think one missed opportunity is really just designing with sort of the vigor to challenge our assumptions. Like right now, I'm trying to think of an example. I lost it again.
That's okay, I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but more creation, I think, right?
Yeah.
More creating, activating spaces also, I think, with AR, like Jared was talking, or with VR. Like, I love to see a room where it's just creating, like, similar to what is like the reality lab here, right? But accessible to communities
Yeah.
throughout the city, or you know, learning deserts, right, where you can have these spaces where people are like creating, imagining futures.
Sounds like the perfect thing for Seattle Public Libraries to create these
Yes.
XR hubs.
It's a hub.
I'm back. I got it.
Oh, go ahead.
So I was talking to a student earlier today, and they brought an example where I'm trying to remember the example what we were talking about. But the idea of like currently with the way we think about XR and what we're solving, a lot of times we're solving superficial levels of symptoms of the issues in our society. So when I mean challenge our biases, I mean actually solve for systemic issues. Like, I remember an example. So like, when designing for VR and social, some teams were thinking about like we should change their voices or enable women to speak in other voices and other tones so that they don't get gendered immediately and treated differently based on their gender and experience violence. But the issue was really the biases we have in our life. And I think XR fundamentally can change the world, change the way we see the world, so why can't it change those systems? And I think that's a huge missed opportunity when we think about use cases and what products we're designing. It's like we're designing almost gimmicky solutions. We're not that designing for the actual solution at the system level.
I like that one too. Okay. We have a lot of work for you all to get to, those of you in education. All right, I think we have a little bit of time. I don't know what time we're supposed to be done. Sorry? 55 after. Okay, so we have some time. Does anyone want to ask questions, pose ideas to the education panel?
There's microphones in the back of the room here.
I have this light right in my eyes, so I can't see. Like, is anyone out there? Does anyone?
Questions?
Oh, there's a question over here. I can hear you, and then I can reiterate.
I'm curious if you thought about, we talked about, you mentioned the geographic difficulties and changing that space. And I'm really curious about uses of XR for populations that have less access to transportation, especially people in like senior homes and like continued learning in those spaces, or for incarcerated populations. So I'm curious if you've seen any work on those with those kinds of populations for education.
For incarcerator, it's really hard, right? I work with one project in New York, but because technology, you cannot have any connectivity and all of that, so it's really challenging. So we're doing something very low tech, but it would be an incredible access, right? But you have to really work on the logistics and all of that for that.
And I do know actively there are a couple of projects for seniors for travel. I've seen some stuff about VR travel experiences that reduce stress in seniors who are in residential facilities. So I know that's a thing and has quite a bit of potential, I assume. Anybody who's homebound, I mean, I always go back to, now I'm babbling again, but you know, education isn't accessible for certain types of children even. So anybody, I think, who's homebound, who has an opportunity to engage socially or embodied learning or whatever, otherwise it seems like a unique application for any XR technology.
And I think that Jinha Lee had a program here from UW where they were designing for VR for incarcerated youth.
Oh,
But it was, I think it was all analog, so like storyboarding or something like that.
she's in the iSchool here. Okay, good question. Is there another question out there?
Yes, I have a question, and from my accent you understand I'm Italian, but I live in Washington State since 8 years. So the use case that I bring to you as educators and involved in the education is, I was shocked when I moved to the US about the percentage of homeschooling kids that you have. In Italy, the country where I come from, is not allowed. Parents can get in prison if they don't send kids to school, okay? Just to be very realistic. I personally believe that school is a social environment and kids need to stay with other kids, but this is my personal opinion, okay? But at the same time, and I work for STMicroelectronics, so I might be biased, but at the same time, I'm a firmly believer that technologies can help people, right? So I totally see this as a real use case because I discovered that there are really millions of kids, and not only kids, right, teenagers, etc., that for whatever reason, they don't have the social aspect of school, of learning with others, right, and instead staying just with the parents. I don't know, is there any program? Are you thinking about this real use case that can be an interesting for both educators and even the industry, right, to enable these millions of kids to learn in a more social environment?
So I was homeschooled from up until 9th grade, and this could be a whole nother panel as to whether or not I was properly socialized. We could go on to that topic for a little bit. But I do, so like growing up, you're right that the day in, day out socialization just kind of wasn't there, and that did have some impacts. It's not crippling to homeschool kids' future ability by any stretch of the imagination, but I do remember that a lot of my experience just existing within a social circle, like existing within a group, came from online games, notably RuneScape. And it occurs, and like the interactions you're able to have with people there are like doing activities alongside each other, but the communication is entirely over just like live text. Which is a very limited mode of communication. And so there's only so many aspects of that kind of social interaction I was able to get experience with out of that. And so I could imagine if instead I was playing like VR games or like in Rec Room or like interacting with avatars rather than usernames, then maybe that would have helped me a little more back then. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that helps address your question.
But I think that that's why you have to support libraries and museums, because they are the ones who provide, or other institutions that are about informal learning, so then that you have these spaces where kids can actually go outside of school and create some interaction or build skills, you know, like we're working, we're piloting this program with a very small library in Texas, rural Texas, and most of the kids are homeschooled, but they come on Saturday to work on this project for VR, so that's like an entry to socialize with others and also test the technology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry about the plug, but I had to do
No, you gotta plug the library.
I don't have an answer, but I have a question. So you work in like VR for mental health with teens, right? I did read your bio, it's true. I'm curious, like if you've seen, like the assumption is that if kids are socializing through VR and XR predominantly in the future, that it will have an impact on their social development. I'm curious what you think is going to happen if the use case we're thinking of does become a reality.
You mean the isolation that it can create?
Well, the opposite. Hopefully, unity.
Okay. So what is the potential?
What is the potential, like, how might it impact how kids are growing up, like, how they define their identity, how they interact with each other?
I mean, they love, one of the things that I heard from them was that they really love the telepresence, the embodiment, right? Being able to can feel that they were physically with others in the same space, right? And interact with this body. So that's something I think that we can explore or nurture, this social aspect. They like that a lot.
Have you seen them portray themselves and express themselves as like an idealized version of themselves, or like what they think they should be instead of who they actually are in reality, or how they see themselves?
But that's really hard to ask them, right, or grab, right? That's
Measure that. Measure that.
yeah, that'd be really hard. But I think, it's about, I think, creating trusting relationships, right? And I think that's what I think that VR is, that hook that lets you create these moments, these interactions that build on trust. And then that way, then you create supportive spaces for them.
That's a really good point. Trust is very important, for sure.
Yes.
And
It's hard.
I'm just going to comment that some of the data I have from other projects even is that teens are more likely to be authentic in a digital space because it's so much less threatening. So it's a concept of a digital shield. So I like to think that's a huge upside if I can feel a little more confident, a little more comfortable, and then in fact be more authentic with others in that space.
I'm very curious if the data was predominantly men, like boys.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, but I see that in a lot of the teens we're working with. All right, what time is it now? We have time for another question.
Hi, so I spend a lot of time in VR headsets for my job, and frankly, they get a little bit uncomfortable after a while, right? You got this heavy thing on your head, you might be strapped too tight, you get headaches, the headband gets all sweaty, it gets a little bit gross in there. What specific improvements to the hardware platforms do you think would be needed specifically for education applications? Is it going to be head-mounted stuff? Are we talking about maybe projections, holograms? Any ideas on improvements to hardware to make the VR experience a better one for everyone, and especially students?
I have a deviant answer. I say we don't need hardware improvements, to be honest. I think the reality is that real-life learning will remain very valuable and irreplaceable by digital learning to some extent. And so I think personally, rather than improving, I think the hardware we currently have or we will have in 2-3 years will be sufficient. I think it's a matter of designing for frictionless and seamless transition between online and offline learning, so that what you learn in XR isn't completely gone or forgotten, or like you have to like struggle to actually connect it to then your real life lessons or like real life classroom.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Then, so how about full body tracking though? Would that make the experience a little bit more interesting or immersive?
Probably, because kids are very active, right? They don't just think and play with their hands, they play with their whole body, with the environment. But then the tricky thing is like that occurs a lot of times in outdoor environment, and currently full body tracking is only enabled by like 20 senses around you or something like that, right? So for sure, if we do want to kind of push the boundaries of like discovery-based or like experience-based learning, we do need to push that hardware. But I'm thinking like maybe a little bit closer today.
Okay.
More realistic version.
Jared, what do you think about? You have a lot of students in and out of headsets all the time. So what are your thoughts?
We put 600 students through VR headsets this quarter, and the key has definitely been make actually using the VR headset not the core of the experience. Like make that an element of it, but I find to use VR, AR effectively for education, you don't necessarily have to be using VR, AR that entire time. I kind of find the Ready Player One model of VR education, where just a student is in a headset in a virtual classroom for the full school day, utterly terrifying. I do not want that to be our future.
I already have a headache just thinking about it.
Yeah. Like, I suppose you probably could design a headset that eventually would not give you a headache after that amount of time, but I don't really think that that's the way we want to go.
I totally agree, yeah.
Well, and I'm just going to make a plug for human-centered design again. But, you know, the current headsets are not human-centered. So we have a lot of, I personally have face pain with the Quest 2. We have a lot of teenagers, typically female, telling us that the headset's uncomfortable. Or not a lot, but a good chunk, 10, 15%. So I worry about that, but I think it's time to re-envision the headsets to make sure they're comfortable for a more diverse population. It just needs to happen, so.
One specific thing, you know how the HoloLens 2 can like flip up so the lenses are out of your way? I would love to have that in a VR headset for the classroom. That would be so nice.
Yeah, you could flip it off,
That
so
would
you
be
could get
nice.
some relief.
Yeah,
for,
you don't have to like
Slide
awkward,
it up
like,
and, yeah.
slide it off and with the controller still in your hands and cables and yeah, it would be lovely.
Yeah,
I hope you have some students that can work on that here.
yeah. Who's the student who's going to work on this? Redesign the headsets. All right, one more question. This will be the last one, I think.
I guess this is a question for the whole panel, but yeah, when it comes to VR, XR, whatnot, obviously it's a new technology, cutting edge, and there's a lot of the benefits and affordances. We're still kind of in the dark about a lot of that. So as people investigating, I guess, the educational benefits and uses of VR, do you ever find yourself in that dual role of kind of being the developer who's trying to find the solution to a task, maybe teaching a course about physics, for example, but at the same time needing to kind of tear down that use objectively as a scientist or investigator that you potentially put labor hours into, and so it's almost a conflicting role. Do you find yourself in that position, and do you find that is a difficulty, I guess?
You are describing my dissertation? Yes. I find it a valuable position to be in, but it's also difficult, as you say, to at once like trying to build a project that you're really invested in, but at the same time also have a very critical eye for, is this helping the way we think it is? Is that help happening because of mechanism X, mechanism Y? Wearing those different hats is really hard. It really helps to have people to guide you and bounce ideas off of on both sides and have those not be the same person.
You have to work with a team, of people, yeah.
For sure.
Takes a village.
Well, and I just want to comment, there are very few best practices out there. Like, we really are still at the beginning of this whole adventure. And there's, you know, for someone like Jared, who's really just pioneering a whole space, there's very little to go on about students tend to X when given what we don't have that much to go on. So he's really taking on a lot by developing a whole new space, but then also trying to simultaneously assess and probably, maybe in the dissertation, have something, an ear towards some best practices from all of that experience. We'll see. Anything else to add about? All right, well, I'll just say that in my work, I tend to critique, I'm often asking, yes, we can, but should we? So with everything I'm trying to design, I'm asking, but should we? We're measuring it, but should we be building this? And is the benefit going to outweigh the risk, and so on and so forth? So that's a never-ending, constant question in my head with everything we design.
Same here. I mean, it's like part of the job. It's part of the job of being a designer. And like in my role, I work with external clients. So a lot of times I'm the person asking, should we? And they're the person saying, we should. And I'm like, but wait a minute. So like ultimately it's about like digging deeper into what are we actually trying to do and figuring that out. So I found that's just really important to ask good questions.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental design skill, to be honest. But yeah.
Critical thinker, yeah. That's a great point. All right, well, let's end on that beautiful statement from Maureen. Thank you to this panel for running in here and talking about education.
All right.